Hello everyone and welcome to Make It I'm gonna redo that. Hello everyone and make it to... You know what, I'm probably just gonna include this because it makes me look dumb and I like making fun of myself. So, hello everyone and welcome to Making the Rounds. You probably didn't expect to see us until the end of round 1, but luckily or unluckily for you, we decided to try to do this daily. So, here we go. Effectively, we're going to break this down by relevant topics of the day instead of just going over game by game or team by team and droning on. It's like, so what happened with EVOS? Well, it was more or less expected. Yeah, it did. Next topic, you know? I think the topics everyone are kind of curious about for today are what happened with like the Western teams. Is this kind of what we expected? And then of course the highlight match was RNG versus KingZone, and here and there are a couple of interesting meta things that will pop up, but probably won't make it its own topic unless there's something at the end that we feel is really important to discuss. But anyway, I feel like Fnatic and Team Liquid have separate problems. Would you agree on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So what for you was the biggest issue with Team Liquid for you?
So Team Liquid, when we came in, we talked about how they really want to, or not want to, but how they love to kind of group mid, even though sometimes it would be better to, say, put pressure in the side lane, especially if you have something like a gangplank. So I know a lot of people probably thought I was crazy because I was looking forward to the TL EVOS matchup, because EVOS had previously focused on side lanes and Team Liquid was very, very mid lane focused, even with like grouping as 5 when maybe it's not the best idea. And EVOS actually kind of learned what mid lane was today. So they played differently than what I expected, but I also think it still drew out that, and the KingZone series did show a lot of Team Liquid's problems when it comes to trying to create side lane pressure. I don't think they necessarily understand when they should do that or how to play around it, and it became a very clear problem. I think even more so I think it was more visible, I guess, in the EVOS game, because I don't think EVOS played, and like, I don't want to stomp on them, but like, I don't think they played like particularly well, you know. Their first turret went down, I think like 23 minutes or something like that. And they just kept kind of trying to group mid. They had a lot of engage, and TL kept kind of going into fighting them. And that's a problem when it's better. It's a better idea to split pressure, and that was the main thing that I saw from Team Liquid. That's like not a new thing, but if you're looking at their games today and you're wondering why did they lose to EVOS, why did they lose to KingZone, that's, in my opinion, a huge part of it.
You can almost manufacture this as like EVOS is the RNG Academy team and TL is the KingZone Academy team, because it was like a really, really, really bad version of RNG versus KingZone, in a sense. Obviously, this game was closer, but in terms of what these comps presented and what options EVO/RNG had, I felt like that they were somewhat similar, because in the case of KingZone, the Tahm Kench gets picked early, and you know you can't really, Tahm Kench Ryze get picked early, so you know you can't really sideline super well. In the Team Liquid case, it's like the Gangplank Ryze. But they don't get picked until after the Ornn Cassiopeia, so my argument goes a little bit out the window. But it's, when you see Ornn Cassiopeia, your mind as Team Liquid is probably, okay, we should avoid team fights, generally speaking, because Ornn is gonna trap us and run over us. Cassiopeia is gonna get the flank ult, and it's just gonna be a very effective late game, mid-late game team fight comp. And so what we would want is rather to just play like heavy side lanes or strong side lanes. So Team Liquid actually draft for this, and I think Team Liquid's draft is actually really insane.
It's great. They have Ryze. They have Gangplank for side wave control. It's a good draft.
And then if they do want to like have Baron control, you obviously have the threat of the Gangplank ult. You have the long range options from Jhin, Tahm Kench. It's really hard for the enemy team to sideline against you because you have Tahm Kench. And in that sense, like it's really strong. But so your question then becomes like, what are EVO's options? They can play really hard early and kind of deny some of Team Liquid's ability to have, because like their sideline options aren't even super strong until late. But even then, it's like Gangplank into Ornn can sometimes be sort of skill matchup based, depending on like barrel placement and stuff like this. And then Ryze, once he gets Tier and Catalyst, especially, he'll probably get the push against Cassiopeia. So it's like still a very limited window for TL to do much, or for EVOs to do much early. But you can still get that if you play like a fast tempo jungle. Then the enemy team has to be more cautious. Those sorts of options. Team Liquid went ahead and they banned a lot of jungle picks that EVOs have liked, like the Graves, Kha'Zix, stuff that can be super aggressive early. So you have something like Nidalee left, but then Ornn, Cassiopeia, Ezreal do a lot of magic damage. You kind of want to avoid like something like that. Of course, they go Zac anyway, but whatever. And but it's still kind of like limited options for EVOs in general. Really, the only thing that they have, and I kind of agreed at the end that they need to go something that forces mid, because if they try to play to side or anything and get like an aggressive jungle pick, they don't have good windows for invades. They aren't necessarily going to get anything that can match Ryze or Gangplank inside at a point, and if they go for a side-focused jungle, you're basically, what you're doing is matching Tahm Kench. So it's really meh overall what EVO's options are. TL basically have to make a mistake for this to work. Like, just looking at the draft straight up, you know in your mind, Team Liquid have to fuck up for this to be an effective strategy from EVOs. Anyway, thoughts?
No, I mean, that's kind of like, it's not draft, it's execution, and it's not something that is unexpected, I guess. Like, I thought they would lose to EVOS in a different way, but I think that in terms of the weaknesses that TL showed, it's not anything new. It's stuff that we talked about in our preview, and it's stuff that they showed all split in North America. So it's just I guess people are paying more attention to them now that it's in like a very sharp focus, I guess. But these aren't like new issues for the team, I think, is what I would want to stress.
And we can talk about specifically like the things that happened for TL versus both KingZone and EVOs, because they were similar. I think a lot of it comes
KingZone RMG, you mean?
Or KingZone Team Liquid.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because I think that if we're focusing on Team Liquid as a team, which is the original goal, then they had similar comps. They had the Jhin, Tahm Kench bot lane in both. They had the Ryze in both. And then they had I mean, they didn't have a similar jungle pick, but they had similar kind of ideas of how these compositions should be played. And in the case of the KingZone game, there were several cases where Ryze was pressuring enough to effectively pull KingZone, like multiple members of KingZone, to Ryze's lane, which should be really good for Team Liquid, even if Pobelter ends up having to die, because then they can just push mid and get mid turret, and then they can continue to and get pressure in those like 2 lanes for 1 basically, and end up being very successful in that. But often they just reactively went up and tried to defend Pobelter, and there was like one part in particular where KingZone aren't even pushing the wave. Like, Pobelter runs all the way back to his 2nd tier turret. His 1st tier turret is no longer up. He runs all the way back to his 2nd tier turret. KingZone, like 4 members of KingZone chase him all the way to his 2nd tier turret. The wave is all the way back at KingZone's 1st tier turret, right? And Team Liquid react, instead of pushing mid, they react by running up. We have to defend Pobelter and our turret. Guys, It's fine, there's no wave, it's okay. But so there were a couple of instances like that. There was something where they went to go start Dragon when KingZone were grouping mid. They ended up not having answering pressure there, so a lot of it was just like they were not able to play. They wanted to overgroup, which is something that we sort of have characterized NA with before. They gave up wave control in one section where they could get it in order to group, and that's a very typical characteristic that we expected. It was a bit more. It was really weird against EVOS, because you would think that that would be their home turf, and for me, it's also weird that they're tunneling on the Ryze pick as a result. You know? Yeah,
I mean So in terms of Ryze as a pick, there's nothing wrong with it, but you have to know, again, like to our point, is you have to know when you want to use that to pressure a side lane and then taking objectives when you are pressuring a side lane. And that's the problem with Liquid picking this, in my opinion, is that they're just not using it correctly in terms of how they treat the Ryze, which is frustrating. And
KingZone both times went for compositions that KingZone and EVOS both went for compositions that are really strong 5v5. In KingZone's case, it was response to the Ryze pick. And that's kind of what you would expect if you're seeing a Ryze picked early in the draft. Because you have to be able to, you're betting on the enemy team not effectively utilizing the Ryze or whatever else, and then that's kind of what happened. KingZone picked champions that that pressure lanes really effectively, so that it was hard for Team Liquid to get towers unless they are rotated. So that was also an aspect. I think the Soraka pick is very interesting. This was the first game this tournament we've seen it succeed. It also succeeded again in the Flash Wolves game. I have been going over and over again why they're picking this. You can queue the wave, so it's good against like certain push mages, but also the Emax is something that a lot of supports are doing, is the Emax. And it seems ridiculous to me, because when you max E, it still has like a 16-second cooldown. But then, like, I did the math, right? If you factor in the 40% CDR and the fact that once you cast E, there's a 1.5 seconds period where it's zoning before the snare triggers, right? And then after that, once it's maxed, it has a 2-second snare. So you're effectively 3.5 seconds where the E is in effect and it's already on cooldown. Plus, if you have 40% CDR, you're shaving off like 6.5 seconds of time. So effectively, you reduce like a 16-second cooldown to 6 seconds where the spell isn't actually in effect, you know? Like only 6 seconds where it's not being used and it's on cooldown. So actually maxing E can be pretty effective. It's really annoying as a zoning tool. They had Cho'Gath and Soraka, so in team fights you can stack like 2-second duration silences, right? Effectively. And then enemy team literally cannot cast spells, so I don't know why you would try to group versus that, why you would team fight versus that, why you would think that would be a fun time. But all you need is a Malzahar, and it's a party.
And you're not even mentioning the karma as well, because then you have, like, on top of all that, you then have karma shields and heals. And
so it's like you never kill that team unless it's pre-level 6 when Soraka is a sitting duck. Fun time. EVOS didn't even, like, they probably saw that game. It's like, you know what? We like Cassiopeia. We like, Ornn. Let's just Ornn, Cassiopeia, Alistar. We're not even hiding what we're doing. We know they can't execute their side lane shit. Good stuff. So, it was a fun game.
It was interesting.
So what would you tell Team Liquid to do, basically?
Stop over grouping when you have pressure, and like, don't, it's okay. Like, part of creating pressure on the map, it's okay if, like, one person dies as long as you get something else elsewhere. So, like, it's all right. You don't have to go rescue your comrade. You don't have to contest absolutely everything as 5. You can actually let something go, especially if you set up something elsewhere. And especially with these team compositions that they picked, it's actually super easy to do that. So if they're going to continue going this route and trying to split with side lane pressure, you need to actually continue to focus on having that side lane pressure and playing around it and like leveraging that for objectives. That's pretty much it. Like, it's not, there's nothing, like, in my opinion, there's actually nothing wrong with these drafts. It's just the execution.
Yeah, and you might think we sound crazy for not just saying, well, short term, they need to change their draft, but it's like, these are comps that Team Liquid played in North America. Because relative to a lot of North American teams, they weren't terrible at trading sides. They weren't terrible at that kind of thing. Like, they had better overall macro than a lot of those teams, so telling them to just, like, play group 5v5 comps is also not in their comfort zone anyway. Like, they loved the Jin, Tom, Kench, Ryze stuff within the context of NA. So, and also, if you tell them to not play those picks, they end up giving up Ryze probably to a team that understands sideline pressure better than them, and then they lose. Because if you effectively can play sideline pressure really well, you just lose to Ryze. You just win with Ryze.
Yeah.
Like, that's why that pick is so strong. It's like, a lot of people say, oh, Ryze has low win rate, but if you can execute the pick, it is insanely disgusting. So, yeah, that's kind of where we are. Fnatic is a fun time.
I'm going to let you take the reins on this one. I have a few notes, but again, you know this team a lot better than I do, so.
So, it's not even knowing the team necessarily. Like, I look at the first game in particular, and it's really weird. You end up with a draft that basically...
that game was weird in general, yeah.
Has very few pressure lanes, and you gave RNG a faster tempo jungler. Like, there's a situation where both Trundle and Olaf are level 6, and most people think Trundle wins on Olaf 6, but at that point, Ryze had mid-priority versus Yasuo, and so Trundle just had to give up his blue buff. It was like, yep, how you do, bye! Can't 1v1, even try to 1v1 you, because Ryze will come. So, fun time. But it's just, and then everyone was like, he's like... And everyone was talking about how, oh my god, UZI is 25 CS up on a Kog'Maw! Guys. Kog'Maw Tom Kench versus Kai'Sa Braum. Obviously.
Yeah, as long as Kai'Sa...
No one should be 25 CS up ever, okay? That's a valid point. But they should win that lane. This isn't like Kog'Maw having 0 lane pressure early or anything like this. Kog'Maw is a 1-item 80 carry. Guinso's Rageblade. Go to town, have fun. So is Kai'Sa, theoretically.
I mean, if you miss that, like, level 3 kill kind of spike that Kai'Sa has, then the Kog'Maw has the lane. Like, no question, and right? Like, that's not... I mean, I think... So whenever people talk... I'm just gonna, like, interrupt. I guess whenever people talk about UZI at international competitions, I do think there is one thing to be said, and it's not like, oh my god, UZI is a god. I mean, you can think that if you want, but I think the thing about UZI is that if you're not used to playing against an 80 carry that's going to contest you for every single CS, that is something that, you know, requires adjustment in lane. Because if you're not used to this Kog'Maw getting up in your face and fighting you for that minion, because why would you do that? It will catch you off guard. And I think that's probably something that should be taken into consideration just when looking at UZI at international competitions generally, because I don't think a lot of teams outside of China are used to going up against an 80 carry that's going to be just that aggressive over his farm.
It's also interesting because Fnatic gave up the tempo jungle pick. Like, you have everything you need to punish Kai'Sa teams. On RNG side, you have tempo jungle and winning bot lane. That's basically what you need, because then you want to deny enemy jungle. If you deny enemy jungle, then you don't have to be really afraid of the level 3 all-in that much because you have control of bot. And the enemy jungle isn't going to force a gank or anything that uses the level 3 all-in. So it's like RNG had a very effective setup as soon as Fnatic first picked Kai'Sa. That's hard to execute, but we talked about how it is possible to counter Kai'Sa on the last episode anyway. So RNG did it. Congrats. The other thing is that this draft, Fnatic's draft, is so poor. Like
I was gonna say schizophrenic.
I don't like just blaming drafts, but they had a very narrow window, and this is where I go back and criticize execution. But when you have a draft like this, you end up with very specific win conditions. You're forcing your team, like as a coach, this is why like crappy drafts are crappy, because you're basically putting more pressure on your team and saying, you have to take more risks because my draft is bad. You have to execute this much better because my draft is bad. And the reason why this draft is poor is because at a point, Yasuo, like no one can 1v1 Cho'Gath, no, like neither Vlad nor Yasuo can 1v1 Cho'Gath.
Yeah.
And then Ryze will beat Vlad. So also, Yasuo did not take TP, so you don't even have the option of having Yasuo in a side lane versus Ryze. So you're in a position where there was a very narrow window where they could put Yasuo against Ryze. That was like right before Baron spawn and right after Baron spawn. And some people might say, yeah, but you say right after Baron spawn, but they have Kog'Maw Cho'Gath. Why would you leave Baron open at 20 minutes versus Kog'Maw Cho'Gath? Well, they had taken 2 turrets by the time Baron spawned in the bot lane. So even though you can take a very fast Baron with Cho'Gath Kog'Maw, if you do that at 20 minutes, you will lose your inhib most likely.
Yeah, you split.
So you will lose your inhib most likely. So that's like the narrow window where Yasuo can be against Ryze because he didn't take TV. He did that effectively, but he left before he could pressure that and goes mid and dies and gets eaten by Cho'Gath. So they didn't use that. If he had gotten that inhib, it would be really hard for Ryze to push as hard as he did as the game progressed against the Vladimir. So yeah, that was like the very narrow niche where they probably could have won the game. But after he dies mid, or I guess it was more around Baron in the top side area where Cho'Gath ate him, then you are in a position where you basically don't have a win condition anymore. Unless you're forcing super hard and Yasuo gets like the perfect knockout.
Yeah.
Because and then because like people, I made a tweet that was a joke that was like, I made a tweet that was like, see, China wins because of all lanes, and then Mark Zimmerman responds, but how did they win? China wins because of side lane pressure, but how did they win though? Mark says, and because there was a 5v5. The reason why Fnatic forced the initial 5v5 and then RNG respawned was because that was the only option they had. They had to force 5v5 or they will lose the game really fast. They forced the 5v5.
Yeah, RNG will just split against them.
They overextended to take the inhib when they didn't feasibly have time to take the inhib before RNG could respawn, because that was their window. Like, they had to take more risks because their draft was bad. And so they overstay and RNG beat them because they don't have side pressure. So RNG still won the game because of side pressure, ultimately. Anyway, that was a fun time. How do we feel?
I think hopefully people did see from this game in terms of RNG that they are like a split pressure team. Like, this is kind of what we expected to come out of them, or from them, if you watched our previous episode where we talk about them. We're not like the 5v5 crazy aggressive China team. Like, this is, they do like to split pressure a lot, and hopefully people saw that. And
obviously it wasn't perfect because there were a lot of execution issues.
Oh, but, no, yeah.
And also, again, like, they have Tahm Kench, which I hate Tahm Kench. Tahm Kench is evil. When Karthus is not viable in the meta, which I guess he's borderline, Tahm Kench is the most annoying champion in the game because he just really limits your drafting options, which is why we didn't see the same kind of RNG later, right? Because KZ early pick Ryze, Tom Kench, and RNG are forced into a position like EVOS, where they have to pick a force comp effectively.
Yeah.
And that did not work out for them, and you see why Ryze is like so high priority, and why Tom Kench is so high priority when it's with a team that can execute like that. And also RNG weren't perfect against Fnatic. They made a lot of mistakes, but yeah, Flash Wolves versus Fnatic, since we're still talking about Fnatic after that aside. How did you feel about Flash Wolves winning this game? Because obviously that was the one thing that was an upset based on both of our predictions.
Yeah.
Was the Flash Wolves Fnatic game.
I mean, in terms of the Flash Wolves and how they played this, it's expected in terms of what they did early, I think. It's not like you look at this comp, you look at what they did. I mean, the only kind of surprise is the Soraka, but then we talked about her earlier, and even though it actually physically pains me to see Sword Art on Soraka, it does still tie into what the Flash Wolves like to do on the bot side of the map. In my opinion, they still played through that. I also think that this wasn't the game where Muujin was actually weirdly aggressive. It was the first game. That was like the most aggressive I've ever seen Muujin play, by the way.
But that draft like really invited it anyway. Like you had Talia. Yeah. If you're not playing like that with Talia Morg, then you're playing incorrectly, basically. And that's one of the criticisms I've had of Muujin, so I was happy.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's kind of still applicable because it's not like Muujin is taking advantage of that sometimes. But yeah, looking at Fnatic in this game, they just didn't seem to have a response to how the Flash Wolves are playing around bot side. And was it at, I'm trying to think, because if I remember correctly, they tracked the Skarner pretty well too. Yeah. Which was a huge problem for Fnatic because I think they were relying on that to try to get ahead early, and that also did not work out for them. Yeah, I mean, I look at the jungle matchup. They shut down the Skarner. They played through bot. I don't mind the Zoe, but I think
the Zoe was fine.
Yeah.
I had to complain about anything. It's the early priority Morgana feels a bit outdated. I think Morgana was insanely early priority on like 8-6 because this was pre-resolve nerf and she won most of like the matchups, the push matchups, but now that we're playing more mages, now that Soraka's been introduced, and this was like part of why Soraka was introduced, is because they were looking for things that are relevant and also have push versus Morgana. If you early pick Morgana, you can expect something that will shove lane hard and push her in, because there are a lot of mage matchups that you can pick now into her. So that would be more my issue with the draft. So you're in a position where Flash Wolves can get bot priority really easily if you're telegraphing your support pick right off the bat, you know? They probably expected like an Alistar or something out of Flash Wolves, and then Morgana is fine, but Flash Wolves were like, ha! We can not really play mages, but we can if you play like headless chickens. Yes, excellent. Okay, good stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I also
had to
think
criticize something in the draft, it would probably be that.
Yeah, the other thing that I think that this game more so than their game against RNG is, I definitely think you see where the team misses SOAS in terms of how much pressure they can create in side lanes with like the Swain. And I'm not saying that like Bwipo did particularly poor, but I think in terms of
problems.
what I saw from Fnatic this split. It's just Soaz is just so good at not only soaking pressure but playing around his minion waves. He knows when to push, and it allows the team to really leverage objectives around the map. And this game, more so than their first game, actually, was really where I saw that kind of hurt them a lot. Because since they didn't have a response to the Flash Wolves' bot side pressure, but then they also couldn't like create pressure of their own elsewhere. And that was a problem.
And in terms of at least Weebo's public-facing pool, which obviously we don't have a lot of data on.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that he's played in solo queue, it's Flash Wolves had a good approach in terms of pinching him when they went after the Gangplank Scion, because I have my doubts about his overall stage-ready champion pool. So I think that was good. And then, of course, Fnatic go in and they banned Camille, which I think is a pick that's fine. And they banned Gnar, because like those aren't necessarily picks that I expect from Flash Wolves top laners anyway.
Yeah.
So they banned those because they really wanted this Swain. And so to me, that means that he might be sort of limited in the champs he can play if he feels the need to play Swain. Because normally something like Camille or Gnar would be really good into what you think Flash Wolves would pick, right? So
yeah,
it was just kind of odd to see that overall. But I do think that generally Fnatic were fine. I liked certain things that Flash Wolves did. Like, I liked the fact that Betty picked Executioner's Calling early. I thought that was good, especially into this kind of comp with the Swain. I kind of expected Fnatic to go Executioner's Calling or Morello's, but they didn't really have that in their builds either. It was like super late because they had Yuhar against Trundle, Soraka, and Vladimir, and you do not pick like something that with grievous wounds, then that's obviously an issue. It was sort of an interesting game. It just feels like Fnatic are really out of sync. It just feels like maybe they're a little bit behind on what's good from these games.
Yeah, I don't know how the scrim meta is shaking out, but it almost seems like they're still a little bit stuck on 8.6.
Yeah, just a little bit. Which, I mean, these were interesting games. What would be your recommendation for Fnatic? Because I actually feel like they're in more trouble than Team Liquid, because Team Liquid's problem was consistent.
Yeah.
Fnatic was a little bit all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, I think for Fnatic, they just if there was something that I would say could make their job a bit easier, and this is a little bit more applicable for their first game and less applicable for the second game, but try to focus on picking something that is like very easy for your team to execute, and don't try to pigeonhole yourself into like only one or two ways to win, especially since you are. And again, like, I'm not trying to dunk on Bwipo, but like, this is obviously his first major event, right? So like, you have someone who doesn't have the same kind of experience as like Reckless or something, and you need to be able to leverage map pressure like you did all split in Europe. And that requires, I think, obviously, like, again, picking for him specifically, but then also picking team comps that are just a little bit easier to execute with a little bit more of an early push, so that you can have a little bit more control over the map early. That would be my thing for Fnatic.
And on Euphoria, Youngbuck was very upfront about saying that against a lot of teams in Europe, they can pick like more scaling comps because they don't have to worry as much about early execution. And I think that's showing through a little bit here, especially in the RNG game. I don't think they expected the kind of thing that RNG came out with. And it just feels a little bit I think it'll help them a lot if they just go home and go over the drafts from today. Like, I think that that will improve what they're expecting a lot, at least their expectation, and maybe get them a little bit more confidence. Because obviously they don't have a lot of time, but they can kind of go over, like, what is super relevant in the meta, how they want to execute, and I don't mean go over drafts as in like, oh, what picks are good. I mean go over drafts as in like, how would you execute this comp? Like,
yeah, execution and win conditions.
I do think that their drafts need some work, but there's just so much stuff that they can improve by having like more of a team discussion about like where are we behind and stuff like this. So a little bit of time left to discuss the highlight match of the day, which was RNG versus KingZone. Ended up being not that fun to watch, but and we already kind of covered what kind of went a little wrong for these teams, and I'm looking at it, it's like they have both Ryze and Camille and Kench. So at this point, it's just a plus. They have a tempo jungle pick. So it's just really, there are so few options for RNG at this point. Unless KingZone screw up and they're able to get like a really, really good force on Ezreal, Tom, Kench, Graves. It's really hard. Like, it's just difficult for them to, obviously they have a lot of force options. They have Ashe, they have Trundle that can kind of cut off some of the escape routes. They have Ornn, so they have force options here. But just I don't. It's difficult. Like, I think KingZone, the first two picks, the Ryze, Tom, Kench were just really strong, and then RNG probably could have gone for something like the Camille themselves. But they were probably assuming, okay, if we pick Camille, then they'll pick Fiora, and we don't want to blind Fiora. So, because then we'll be KT Rolster. But
hey, Smev's been doing that for a year.
But I think they could have approached something like, okay, we can ban Camille counters, like Fiora, and obviously, I think there are just like a lot of Camille counters open. There are a lot of anti-Camille options. Like, you can still play Nara into her, kind of, especially with the Rageblade build. Just a lot of stuff, so they decided not to go for that, and they decided to instead target some of Peanut's better jungle picks. It's not a terrible idea, but it was just like, okay, Ryze and Tom Kench in first rotation, like, probably not the best, you know?
And also, I mean, I think this draft is a good draft against RNG specifically, just because it does everything that RNG... Like, RNG basically gave KingZone everything that they, or RNG themselves, would want to do in a game with creating side wave pressure. And they basically just gave that directly to KingZone. So, that was interesting.
I would say just in general, stylistically, KingZone is a difficult matchup for RNG, because KingZone are really, really good at playing 2-item spike comps.
Yep.
And RNG, I would say, are good playing like kind of more aggressive early style sometimes when they draft for it, but they're really more about like mid to late game 1-3-1 or mid to late game like Baron setups and stuff like this. Because I feel like KingZone will get your Baron before you get to that point.
Yeah. And then they'll just, as we saw, they'll just strangle you out.
Obviously, Ezreal is interesting, because obviously you're not like super 2-item with Ezreal, but you still have to wait before your second tier can stack, so you're gonna build Triforce pretty early on, or something like this, like pretty early on, so he still can play 2-item pretty well. Then you have Graves, really effective there. Camille, extremely 2-item spiking champion. Like, Ornn is dead and murdered at 2 items. So this was a very good comp for KingZone, in particular, and I think that Ezreal is actually pretty good. overall, he has some issues, and I actually liked the prey adaptation of going teleport.
The
a lot
TP.
of people might see teleport and think of this as like from the Unsealed Spellbook days, where you're getting a lot of pressure in lane, and then you back, and you TP and make sure you're not giving up pressure on your back right away. But I think it's more, okay, we might lose pressure in this lane because I'm a tier champion. We might lose pressure after my first back in general, so I'm gonna TP to make sure they don't get chip damage on my tower. So I think it's more like that, especially in the first game that they did this. They did the TP Ezreal with Soraka. I like it better with Soraka because you don't need heal as much, obviously, if you're playing with Soraka, and Gorilla put a couple more W points in just to compensate for that.
Yeah.
Than she would normally, I think. So, and Tahm Kench is super safe, I guess. So I think that there are like limited supports that you can do this with, but it's pretty good for making up for the fact that you're rushing tier on this champion. I guess like some RNG were also really shaky because we mostly talked about draft.
Yeah.
They did a lot of really questionable things with their early setup. Like, they didn't expect the aggressive invade top when they really should. They didn't react to that very well. Like, she didn't trade sides immediately or anything like this. When he had bot pressure, like Lulu Ashe should have bot pressure anyway. So
yeah,
I didn't mind the Ashe pick. I know a lot of people tunneled on the Ashe pick, but Ashe will get better early pressure versus Ezreal than Varus, who probably won't push until like level 5 or something. And then I don't know, I think she's a solid 3-item champ overall. I think she's pretty strong.
Yeah, I don't mind the Ashe. I actually thought we were going to see it from Prey, but it's fine.
And if you're forced into a position where you think you're going to have to play a super hard force mid comp, Ashe is good. Obviously, people prefer Varus. Varus is a really good champion, especially if you think you're having to answer 2-item spikes. But UCI likes Ashe, so we'll go with that. Ashe will have like, I think he was more afraid of the double tier Ezreal scaling, and that's why he went Ashe over Varus. But I'm not as upset about it as the desk seemed to be, I guess.
That was the desk upset. I just heard like the Korean cast just kind of started rambling after a while. But yeah, I think for RNG, not as much in this game, because I think this game it was more about, like you said, they didn't respond to top side very well. And then KingZone were able just to split pressure on them, and they just didn't have a response. But for RNG in their first game, I think we still saw some shaky things from them in terms of like the early to mid games still. Getting their split pressure set up, some of their choices were a little bit odd, and then obviously the thing that everyone's going to point to for RNG is their decision to team fight mid after picking up the Baron and basically giving up all of their advantages instead of just resetting. I think it's like not small, but like it's those kind of mistakes that add up, and that's what separates RNG from a team like KingZone. I actually don't think like KingZone is like here and RNG is like here and then everyone else is like down here. You know what I mean? Like I don't think it's actually as big as what people are saying after this specific game, despite the fact that it was a very one-sided game. But I think for RNG, what they really need to focus on is early to mid game execution and setup, and then also not giving up like sometimes just back and reset, right? And that's something that they do know how to do. It's just they happen to make that mistake in a very visible way against Fnatic. And so you can't, against a team like KingZone, it didn't happen in the KingZone game, but even against a team like Fnatic, But especially against KingZone, if you're looking at this team as a team that could potentially maybe go up against KingZone, you cannot make those mistakes because you will get punished. Like, other teams will punish you for that. And that's what I would say for RNG. Just early to mid setup and that kind of like more precise decision making when you do have the advantage and when you do want to set up the 1-3-1, especially since we've seen RNG set it up so well in China. That was actually super frustrating to watch in the Fnatic game. I was like, no, you guys know what to do here. Don't do this.
I mean, and they had decent setup for most of the time.
Yeah.
Also, Shahu said he wasn't that familiar with the Yasuo matchup, so that's a problem. I
mean, I think that showed.
That was pretty visible. But yeah, and I just, like, again, I don't think RNG got really lucky in terms of the draft and the setup that Fnatic went with, because they weren't really challenged at all early. And we don't see things like MLXG giving up half of his jungle to gank bot because the enemy team can't respond with a counter in jungle anyway. But that will be that was like obvious. That kind of thing was obviously a problem against KingZone, is that they screwed with his jungle and he was like, oh, I don't know what to do.
Where do I go? Yeah.
So let's just do quick fire predictions day 2. KingZone versus Fnatic.
KingZone.
Yeah, we kind of have the most complaints about do we feel like Fnatic are worse than EVOS? Real quick, yes, no.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think Fnatic give up nearly as much. Like, even though EVOS won a game, I don't think Fnatic, they have in my opinion, they have a much better understanding of just, again, like the stuff I've been harping on EVOS about, basic objective trading, minion control, that kind of thing.
Sure. So we're gonna say KingZone probably for this one.
Yes.
RNG EVOS.
I'll go RNG. I think I don't think EVOS can stop RNG's 1-3-1, especially if they draft for it. So it's not gonna be like a Team Liquid thing where they'll be able to force mid, because I think RNG will actually know how to split.
I'm more concerned with early control, because I actually think that I was surprised by how Abraxa was setting up for like pinks and getting vision control and river, and he prioritized scuttle instead of full clear and stuff like this. So and he also managed to use what he did really well. Okay, I remember correctly now. What he did really well was he used the plants, the vision plants.
Oh yeah,
he used the vision plants extremely well to clear vision, because obviously MLXG had tempo on him, and he used the vision plants very well to clear out the vision that MLXG had already placed, and MLXG wasn't really messing with those. So I can see areas where the vision setup might not allow them to counter the stuff that EVOS likes to do, but I still will give it to RNG. Okay. Team Liquid versus Flash Wolves.
Oof. I kind of still want to give this to TL. I don't know. Flash Wolves honestly performed, I guess, better than I expected, but I'm still not super sold on them. I still think of a lot of teams, they kind of have the best understanding of bot side pressure, but I think that if they are forced into a team fight against TL, they'll lose. And I also don't think, like, I know a lot of people are crapping on Fnatic and TL right now, but I don't think it's like a matter of, oh, they're terrible, etc., etc. And I actually don't think Flash Wolves are like super good, despite the fact that it's a good meta for them. So,
and I would say,
I guess I'll still go.
Liquid's biggest problem is something that Flash Wolves don't really counter, because their mid game sucks. Like, their mid game lane assignments are actually a joke. So, yeah. I
mean, I'm still gonna go for TL, yeah.
Sure, Team Liquid sounds good. EVOS versus KingZone.
KingZone. This is not gonna be close.
KingZone. RNG versus Flash Wolves. Actually, there are places where I can see this being interesting, because again, like,
yeah, I actually can see Flashels taking this. I'm gonna go with a weird pick.
You're gonna go with Flashels? Yeah. Okay. Oh, actually, I'm gonna go with RNG because they literally just RNG showed up like the night before, played like 3 scrims, and then came to the studio. So
hopefully they get some sleep.
Yeah, I think I think I still hold out for RNG. I don't know, China bias, whatever. Maybe they play Karsa. That'll be fun.
Yeah, that would be, you know, the against my old team, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of drama, whatever. And then, so I'll go RNG. You're going Flashballs.
Okay,
then we have Fnatic versus Team Liquid.
I'm actually gonna go Fnatic.
Really? Okay.
I think TL will beat Flash Wolves, but then Fnatic will beat TL.
Okay, well, I'll just go TL. I think without SOAS, Fnatic are borderline an NA team, but in terms of understanding sideline pressure and waves and stuff like that, so
damn.
Yeah, I was not impressed by. I think Fnatic need to catch up on more things than Team Liquid do. Like, I feel like Team Liquid has a good read on what they should. Maybe that's more worrying though, because if Team Liquid has a good read on what they should be playing and are doing it wrong, whereas Fnatic are really behind, but they could like figure it out after reviewing Pick Ban tonight, and then they play it correctly. Like, maybe that'll happen. So.
That's the thing with TL that stands out to me. And I don't know if it's like more or less worrying because it's just different problems. But like, this isn't a new, like for Fnatic, it's, you know, figuring out some stuff without their starting top laner does have a lot to do with it. Whereas TL, it's like stuff that we've seen from them that they just might not have been punished as hard for in North America. So I think it's a slightly less easy fix, I guess, if that makes sense.
Sure, makes sense, because, like, Team Liquid, I don't know. I mean, I think Fnatic, even within what they're playing it wrong, so it...
It'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting final game.
So we'll see. I feel like they have both problems, you know?
Yeah.
Secretly. But we'll see how that works out.
You just can't see the other problem, because their easier problems are covering it up. Yeah.
So... Yeah, I think so. Emily is currently 2 ahead of me on predictions, which means that these last 2 games tomorrow are my chance to make it up. So let's go. Hope everyone had a good time. Anything else you have to say, Emily?
No, that's it.
All right. See you guys tomorrow.